Hi everyone. Today I'm going to introduce you to registered servers and central management servers. These are two features built into SQL Server and Management Studio to organize and manage your server infrastructure. They help you by scaling some of the features you're already familiar with from one server to multiple servers. While neither registered servers nor central management servers are what I might call a complete solution to server management, they're still useful and powerful, and most importantly, they're available automatically when you install Management Studio. At their core, both registered servers and central management servers are designed around the task of saving and organizing connection strings to your servers. The basic difference between the two is where the connection strings are stored, and this has a big impact on how each of the two features is used and by who. It's also worth noting that both features can be used at the same time, and for some environments you may have to, specifically because of the current state of implementation of central management servers, as I'll explain shortly. In this video, I'm going to first give you a full picture of registered servers, and then we'll move on to talk about central management servers and compare them to registered servers. In the second part of the series, I'll show you some of this functionality in action as you might use it in the real world. As I said before, both registered servers and central management servers are available out of the box with SQL Server, but unfortunately, the user interface isn't visible by default. To show it in Management Studio, we go to the View menu and then Registered Servers, and you can see a Registered Servers pane has appeared. I like to dock it with the Object Explorer pane because I frequently go back and forth between the two. Across the top of the pane is a set of icons that represents the type of server being shown in the tree view below. These icons work like a group of radio buttons. When we think about multi-server management, usually database engine instances come to mind first, but it's very possible that you can have multiple instances of other types of servers in your environment too, such as analysis services or reporting services. Registered servers allows you to save the connection strings to all of the different types of servers. If the database engine node is expanded, we're presented with two different folders. First is local server groups, and the other one is central management servers. The latter, of course, we'll ignore for the moment. The local server groups node is the root node of a tree that consists of folders, which are also called groups, and servers. Both groups and servers can go inside other groups, so you can set up any hierarchy you want. The hard part is figuring out how best to organize the servers for your environment, because you want to think about how to manage the servers in groups as opposed to individually. A nice feature is that the same server can appear multiple times in the hierarchy. This means you can set up multiple branches that takes the same set of servers and groups them differently. Some common ways to group the servers are by criticality, so development, QA, and production, by department, so sales, finance, marketing, etc., and also by version. Grouping by version deserves some special attention if you're going to be working with more than one, which chances are you will be. You can be super granular about it, but most of the time grouping by major and minor is fine. It really depends on the features you're using. Sometimes a service pack will introduce new features, and if you're using those, you'll want to separate the servers that support the feature from the servers that don't. I recommend setting up the tree so that you can select all the servers of a particular version and also of a particular version and higher. This is so servers that don't support a particular feature can be easily excluded. To add a new group to the tree, it's really easy. Just right-click the parent and select New Server Group. To add a new server to the tree, there are a few different ways. You can right-click the group folder where you want to put the server and select New Server Registration. An empty dialog box will pop up, and this is where you can enter all your connection information. If you're already connected to a server in Object Explorer, you can right-click the server node and click Register. This will pop up the same dialog box, but now it's populated with all the connection information that was used originally. When you save using this method, the server will be placed in the local server groups folder in the root. Finally, if you've used registered servers before, there's import-export functionality that can be accessed by right-clicking any node in the tree, going to Tasks, and then either import or export. I'm not going to cover the basic functionality in more detail because it's pretty self-explanatory. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that registered servers uses a different method to store the connection strings than central management servers. Registered servers saves this information as an XML file in your Windows roaming profile. This means that if you're using a domain account, your server list will be available anywhere you log in as long as you have Management Studio installed on the local machine. The downside to this approach is that the list is visible only to you. If you're managing many different servers, chances are there's a team of people that are managing the same set of servers. In this case, it would be nice if everyone had the same list of servers and that list was stored and managed in one central location. It wouldn't be a great solution if everyone had a copy of the same master list, or worse, if everyone was maintaining their own list. Central Management Server, which was introduced in SQL Server 2008, solves this problem. That version number is important because the connection information is stored in the MSDB system database, and those structures only exist in SQL Server 2008 and higher. With this storage method comes an important best practice, which is to install a completely separate instance of SQL Server to be used only as a central management server. This instance won't take up much memory or storage, and it doesn't have to be insanely fast. It just has to be very reliable and accessible. The database structures in MSDB are available in every edition, so even Express will work, but I do recommend backing up MSDB so the list is recoverable. If you have a separate Windows server that you use only for management purposes, and I recommend that you do this, this is the ideal place to put the central management server instance. Regardless, there's a limitation that a central management server itself can't be registered in the tree. This means that if you try to use an existing instance that you also want to manage, you'll come up against a dead end pretty quickly. Even if you could do that, it's not necessarily a good idea. You don't want to lose the ability to manage all the other servers in your infrastructure if one of the servers is having a problem. Storing the server registrations in MSDB has some advantages and it has some caveats. Because the list is now public, this introduces the need to secure the list. Microsoft was kind enough to provide 2 database security roles in MSDB that can be used to grant access using the standard SQL Server methods. Reading the list of servers is done through views and managed by a set of stored procedures. So not only could you write your own queries to look at this information, but you could also construct a client application or even integration components that either read or modify the list. If you're using policy-based management, your policies and conditions can also be stored in the central management server instance and made common across your entire infrastructure. Now the caveats. First and foremost, at least as of making this video, central management servers only support registering database engine instances. This is really unfortunate because if you inspect the MSDB system tables where the data is stored, you'll find that it does support all the different types of servers. It's just not implemented in Management Studio. Second, only Windows authentication is supported. No usernames or passwords are stored in MSDB. You should be managing your infrastructure using Windows authentication, so I don't consider this a drawback. It's more like enforcement of best practices. So it's just something to be aware of. In order to set up an instance as a central management server, it's really simple. You go to the Registered Servers pane, and you right-click the Central Management Servers node and select Register Central Management Server. You're presented with the familiar connection settings dialog box, and you enter all the information you need to. Once that's saved, using the server tree is exactly the same as registered servers before, but this time with the Central Management Server as the root node. Registering a Central Management Server is just a special case of a registered server, so it will automatically take advantage of that storage mechanism and store the list of Central Management Servers in your roaming profile. When I say setting up an instance of a Central Management Server, that's a little deceptive because every instance can be a Central Management Server. By registering an instance to be one, all you're saying is, hey, store my server list over here. Nothing actually changes in the instance to say that it's acting as your central management server. Really, it's an agreement among people that the server list will be stored in a particular instance. So that was a pretty thorough comparison of registered servers and central management servers, and a quick tutorial about how to get started with them. To the right, I've compiled a table that summarizes the features of the two systems. In the second part of the series, I'll put what we've learned here into practice and show you how to use these features to more easily and effectively manage your server infrastructure. If you have any questions about this video, or if you'd like to suggest topics for future videos, please leave me a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the second part of the series. And we can see this executes correctly on both servers. Now I'm going to make a slight change to the query and run it again. This time we get one row back